Welcome to Engineers Nova Scotia's Town Hall session hosted by Vice President Darrin McLean, P.Eng, and CEO and Registrar Mann, P.Eng. My name is Christine Larocque, and I am the Director of Communications and IT. I will be your session moderator for this event. Today's session is eligible for professional development hours. The goal of our online town hall is to discuss current and relevant issues being dealt with by the association, as well as to provide you with some insight into the association's future goals and initiatives as they relate to regulatory excellence. We hope you will take the opportunity to share your questions and perspectives regarding the regulation of professional engineering in Nova Scotia. There will be opportunities throughout the session for questions and answers. Those will be submitted using the Q&A option and sent directly to the session moderator for consideration. Some questions may be dealt with offline in the days following the session to maximize our interaction during the one-hour town hall session. Without further delay, we will now move into the session environment. Please allow me to introduce your hosts for this event, Engineers Nova Scotia Vice President Darren McLean, P.Eng, and CEO and Registrar Mann, P.Eng.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Can everyone hear me?
I can hear you, Darren, so I'm assuming everyone else can.
Okay, great. So as Christine mentioned, my name is Darren McLean. I'm the Vice President for Engineers Nova Scotia. I'm filling in for President Krista Cumming, who is taking some time off to enjoy her first child, who was recently born. Just want to say congrats to Krista on her first child, and wish you all the best and hope to see you soon. Just going to go through a little bit about myself. So I'm a graduate of Tons Technical University of Nova Scotia, as now Daltech. 1993, I graduated from Tons with a Bachelor of Civil Engineering. And then I went on to do an MBA through St. Mary's, finished that in 2013. And I also did a National Advanced Certificate in Local Authority Administration through Dalhousie and the University of Alberta. Right now I'm doing project management and some civil municipal infrastructure design for a consulting firm in in their Sydney office, CBCL Limited. Prior to this, I've been the Director of Public Works and Municipal Engineer for the Municipality of Richmond down here in Cape Breton. I was there for about 12 years. Prior to that, I was working as a civil engineer and municipal engineer for two consulting engineering firms, CBCL and Vaughan Engineering in Sydney and Cape Breton. And I've served on Engineers Nova Scotia Council for 2 terms, 2007 to 2009 and 2017 to 2019. I just want to give you folks just a little sense of what Engineers Nova Scotia Council has been doing and will be doing over the next year or so. I just want to start by saying that we're in a bit of a period of transition. Long-standing CEO Len White retired last year, and we were very fortunate to recruit and hire Pal Mann. He's a very driven. He doesn't like when I say this, but he's a very passionate person about engineering and the profession of engineering, and we're extremely fortunate to have him with us as our CEO. He'll be talking to you a little bit later about some of the strategic initiatives that we're undertaking this year. So So council has established some goals for the 2020-2021 period in the area of organizational excellence. We have established a governance review task force made up of primarily members of council. And that task force is looking at the association's governance documentation, bylaws, et cetera. They're also looking at developing new policies for review and adoption by Engineers Nova Scotia Council. And there's a wide range of policy areas that the task force is looking at right now. We have also established a terms of reference task force, which is looking at the reference documents for the very many Engineers Nova Scotia committees that are functioning, that are doing a lot of the work and looking after a lot of the business of Engineers Nova Scotia. And so that task force is looking at terms of reference, reporting structures, and what have you, everything that has to do with the many committees that are serving the association. In the area of regulatory excellence, we're reviewing registration and licensing practices. Pal is going to be talking about that a little bit more in detail later on. And then as far as stakeholder relationships go, we're looking at areas of stakeholder engagement, developing stakeholder-specific strategies, and we're looking at Engineers Nova Scotia, their overall communication strategy. Again, Pal is going to be talking about that a little bit more. We continue to promote equity, diversity, and inclusion within the engineering profession. And at the same time, we're continuing to promote and break down barriers faced by women in engineering. We're embarking on a strategic planning initiative. We're in the process of engaging a consultant to help us through the strategic planning initiative. And the goal is there to come up with a 5-year plan that would serve the association. On top of all that, we as council are overseeing the ongoing general management of the affairs and business of the association. We meet 8-10 times a year or as required, and we deal with a whole host of issues that come up on a monthly basis. So it's a very busy time for Engineers Nova Scotia, and but it's very interesting as well. I think that pretty much wraps up my quick overview. I know that Pal has got a lot to go through, so unless there's any questions at this point, I'm going to turn the floor over to Pal. Not seeing anything in the Q&A, so I guess Pal.
Thanks very much, Vice President Darren. Thanks. First of all, thank you to all the participants today. I can see from the list that there's 19 of you joining us today, which is fantastic. That means there's 19 more people who I get to interact with. So thank you for spending an hour of your time with us today. And if you find this useful, you can refer to it because a version of this, we're doing 3 of these town halls. One of them will be posted on our YouTube channel. And we also have one more happening next week. So if you did find it useful, speak to your fellow professional engineers or EITs or anyone, even students if they're interested, to let them know what the association is doing. In this COVID time right now, it's hard to get the word out in an interactive way. So hopefully you'll find this helpful, and hopefully you'll encourage some of your colleagues to participate in discussions on self-regulation. So a bit about me. I am ex-military. I graduated from the Royal Military College of Canada in 1987 with a B.Eng in Civil, and I had a successful 33-year career as a military engineer. mostly on the combat engineering side of the house, expedient engineering, practicing to deliver it under fire or in hostile conditions. And finished off my career after international experience in education and training, where I was an instructor and the dean at the Canadian Army Command and Staff College in Kingston, Ontario. When I retired from the military in 2015, I had the good fortune of finding a position with the Association of Professional Engineers and Geoscientists of Alberta, where I first started off in their corporate services as the director for support, HR, IT, and finance. And then eventually found my passion as moving as the director of professional practice, responsible for continuing professional development, practice standard and guidelines, and lastly, the audits of engineering companies and individuals for professional competence. I've been a licensed engineer since 2000, serving with 3 associations at different times, or being a member of 3 different associations. And right now, I'm only licensed in Nova Scotia. And if you want to find a little bit more about what I was thinking when I joined the organization, if you go to the Centennial version of the Engineer, you'll get a little more insight on what I think I bring to the organization and what I hope to achieve. And you'll get a taste of that today. So let's talk a little bit. It's always nice to get a basis. We always get the question of, what is Engineers Nova Scotia? What do I pay my dues for? And what purpose do you serve? So to get us on an equal footing and let you know what our regulatory responsibilities are. And that's our raison d'etre. As you're aware from your social studies way back in, I guess it was late grade school or maybe early high school, there's 3 types of law in Canada. There's constitutional law, which talks about governance of the nation. There's criminal law, which talks about good things and bad things and how we maintain the veneer of civility in society. And lastly, administrative law. And administrative law is how we live and how we function and how the government protects society in general. And under that administrative law, you will find the Engineering and Geoscience Professions Act, as you will find any acts that deal with professionals. And what the government of Nova Scotia has done is it's established APENS, the Association of Professional Engineers of Nova Scotia, which is our legal name, branded as Engineers Nova Scotia, as the arm that will enforce administrative law as it pertains to the practice of engineering in Nova Scotia. So because of our expertise, the concept of self-regulation, the government, in order for them to develop and maintain expertise to govern all the professions, is far too costly and far too burdensome. So they have set up professional associations to do that on their behalf. So we are in essence an agency of government that helps the government enforce its administrative law. And you can see that in our act under section 3.1, where we're incorporated and we are assigned tasks according to our objectives in the act. So really, when you look at it, what is our purpose? What do we do for the government of Nova Scotia? And I try to talk about our regulatory purpose, our fundamental obligation to protect the public. And we basically operate along the regulatory spectrum. First of all, in order to become a professional engineer in Nova Scotia, you have to have the requisite education, you have to have the requisite experience, and you have to be in good character. And that is what the Board of Examiners and our registration department is all about, is making sure that the people who wish to practice engineering in Nova Scotia are qualified to do so that we protect the public. As you move from the registration area, where everyone deals with Director of Registration in some shape or form, or the registration staff, we move into the second area where we help our engineers and also protect the public. And that's through our support to professional practice. Through our practice standards and guidelines, we hope to provide guidance to you, the professional engineer, on what the level of performance whether it's ethical performance, whether it's the conditions or the obligations you must fill in your practice. We set the bar. And one of our responsibilities is also to educate you on what the expectations are, which is educate you on what we expect you to do, or what actions we expect you to take, or what ethics we expect you to promote. And that will be found in most of our practice standards and guidelines. And if you ever have questions, you can reach out to our staff. The COO, Chris Dove, is very familiar to a lot of you, or you can reach out to me, or you can send an email to Engineers Nova Scotia and it'll get routed to the right person. And lastly, one of the areas we want to do and we will get stronger at is helping you exceed those expectations to become better engineers in order to protect the public. One area we don't do is we don't do audits here in Nova Scotia yet. We'll see how that goes when we talk to the membership about how we show visibly to the public of Nova Scotia that we are maintaining and the standards that we expect our professionals to conduct themselves to. But not everything's perfect, as you know. Occasionally we have transgressions, or we have members of the public who are unhappy with our conduct, and there is a mechanism for those that feel that some of our members aren't living up to their professional or technical standards, that they can raise complaints and we will investigate. So we have a complaints, an investigative, and a discipline arm as well that I would call enforcement. And in those cases, we can look at complaints from the public, determine whether there has been any transgressions, and if there hasn't, we inform the public that the member handled themselves as we expected. Or if there is a transgression, then we go into our discipline side of the house in order to ensure that the shortfalls are corrected and that the person who either acted unethically or practiced unskillfully understands the remedial actions they must take to conform to our standards, or in the worst case, if it's so severe, whether we still consider them worthy of maintaining their membership and practicing engineering in Nova Scotia. And lastly, there's an appeal function as well that's in our Act. That is something where a member feels there's been an unfairness or a procedural matter that has not gone according to our process. We do have an appeal function. So this is our raison d'etre for fulfilling the administrative law functions of the Engineering and Geoscience Professions Act. I want to give you a little idea of what's happening in the rest of the country. As you know, there's 13 other regulators out there that look after engineering in Canada. And I'll just give you a little snapshot of what's keeping other people busy. Normally, these trends are like a wind that goes from across the country. So normally what happens in one area may have an impact on other areas. So starting from west to east, in British Columbia right now, the engineers and geoscientists of British Columbia have had some major challenges in conforming to a new act that has been in place in British Columbia called the Professional Governance Act. When there were a couple of instances where the government of British Columbia believed that some organizations, not necessarily engineers and geoscientists British Columbia, but some organizations related to the natural resources sector, we're talking biologists, chemists, geologists, there's a few more that are in that umbrella as well, may have been acting in self-interest. And as a result, they did a review of all the governance of regulators, and they have set up a regulator of regulators called the Office of the Superintendent of Professional Governance. And their new act has, in response to a audit done by one of the world's foremost experts on regulatory matters, denoted a few things that need to be corrected. So they are becoming much more, there's much more overwatch on the way these regulators work. They're affecting council size, affecting composition of council, affecting things like mandatory CPD, bringing in things like the regulation of companies. So British Columbia is just now at the tail end of all that in terms of understanding the regulation, and now they're changing their policies and standards to conform to that. Another challenge that's happening in British Columbia and Alberta is related to, and it's also spilling over to New Brunswick as well now, is related to independent practice rights for engineering technologists. There's been aggressive moves in both Alberta and BC by their respective technologist associations to win independent practice rights for technologists. And both these moves have been challenged by the engineering and geoscientist associations, APEGA and EGBC, in the angle of protecting the public and having more than one regulator of engineering practice, which can create confusion to the public. So we are tracking that very closely to see how that goes. We have a wonderful relationship with Technova, and I don't see that changing in the long run. However, Technova is also party of the National Technologists Organization, and sometimes, regardless of intent, momentum can carry you in a direction based on what your sibling associations are doing. So this issue has raised its head in New Brunswick as well. And the Association of Professional Engineers and Geoscientists of New Brunswick is now developing strategies to present their position on their concern with legislation changes proposed by the technologists, and that engagement with government is happening now. Once a year, we get a briefing from Field Law, which is a law firm in Edmonton, one of Canada's leading law firms on regulatory issues. In fact, our lawyers, Cox and Palmer, and we sit in on that session, recognizing that Field Law has a lot of expertise in this area. And there was a number of cases that were briefed by Field Law that affect the regulation of professionals in Canada. It's not my intent to go through the full list. If you go to the Field Law website and you're interested in this sort of thing, you can find synopses on all the case histories that relate to this issue. But to let you know some of the areas that we're tracking and we're watching to see if they require any policy changes inside Engineers Nova Scotia. There's the duty to cooperate with investigators related to a police case in New Brunswick where the police had to give up all their records related to a specific incident to the attorneys who were representing someone who had been wronged. So we're watching this one to see what that would mean in the case of engineering cases where someone puts in a complaint and looks for information regarding the complaint that may sit in the engineer's possession. There's been an increased number of court cases where the court has deemed a complainant as vexatious and frivolous in the sense that they don't have grounding for complaint. And one of the things we've seen out there for a long time is that someone who wishes to sue a professional has used the professional complaint process to either gain information or to put pressure on someone to stop the litigation and settle. So it's something we're watching to see what the decisions would be out there. There's the...
Hal, I do have a question.
Sure.
It's from Christopher Davis. He says, Engineers Nova Scotia so far continues to stay, just one sec here, continues to stay separate from professional geoscientists. Despite the close professional relationship we have with them, many other associations have moved in the opposite direction on this front. As this move is typically put to a vote to the entire membership, I have two questions. Number one, are there plans to put this to a vote again sometime soon? And number two, if so, will there be any communications plan to help inform the membership about why this is good or bad?
Yeah, So, Chris, there's been no discussions while I've been here for the last 13 months on amalgamation with the geoscientists. I know talking to the ED of Geoscience Nova Scotia, they haven't raised that flag either. I am tracking their general health and their general size. It's something that we'll have to talk about in the strategy discussions that I'll talk about later with council. So right now, nothing. But if it does come up, we'll have lots of discussion and open discussion on this issue as well. So going back to the field law cases, the other two that I would just like to talk about is delay in professional disciplinary proceedings. Many of you probably have been tracking the legal world in the sense that people are being charges are being dropped against people because it's taken too long for them to get through the disciplinary, the legal process. And the same is holding through for professional disciplinary processes. There have been cases involving dentists in other provinces that have been dismissed because it's taken too long to get in front of a decision-making body. So it's something we're cognizant of, not necessarily a problem for us in Engineers Nova Scotia. And the last one is social media and the freedom of expression. We're tracking this one closely. This relates to a nurse in Nova Scotia whose father was in long-term care, and she was unhappy with the care her father was receiving. So first of all, went on social media to complain or to more or less talk about what she was unhappy about. And that social media post eventually was circulated more widely. And as she had identified herself as a registered nurse, there was complaints by those who were talked about indirectly in her Facebook post about her professional conduct. After being found by the association and then being found guilty in a subsequent appeal, the nurse appealed to the Court of Appeals in Saskatchewan, and the decision was overturned. So we're just trying to figure out what this means, because a lot of people are always conscious of our obligations to protect the integrity of the profession versus the freedom of self-expression. So we're just trying to figure out what that means for everyone so that we can act accordingly based on what our rights are as individuals to say what we want. So I'll just give you a little idea of what I've been doing for the last 13 months and where we're going in the next little while. So I arrived here in the 3rd of February, 2020. I'm very excited to be working in the position. And for the first little while, I started looking at what it is that we needed to do, or I as a CEO thought we needed to do. And I was ably supported by a CEO transition working group. And I briefed the CEO transition working group on what I thought were 4 thrust lines of where I would like to look at strengthening our capacity and our capability. And the plan was going along well, and then COVID hit. So I moved away from looking at strategic issues and looking at our direction for the future, and more or less troubleshooting and being very reactive of how we would continue to provide engineering expertise as a regulator and for the registration side of the house and the membership support in a COVID environment. And that involved a lot of transition and refocus internally as we moved to a more online presence, strengthened up our IT system, figured out how we were going to work remotely from home from the staff with our data management and everything like that. And that was a fairly complicated task that we're feeling the benefits of the work we did then. There's still some more work to do, which I'll talk about in our strategic plan. But during that period, on the 14th of May, I briefed council about my draft objectives, moving along those 4 thrust lines of organizational excellence, regulatory excellence, for both registration and regulatory excellence for professional practice, and lastly, stakeholder engagement. And I started developing the concepts based on the approval in principle on council. Unfortunately, COVID, scuttled my personal moves, and I had to spend June and July going back to Edmonton and selling a house and moving back here to Nova Scotia and finding a house. So it was a slow period in terms of work on that process. However, connecting to council remotely with that great work we did on being able to work from home, I was able to talk about the strategic objectives that I would like to attain. And I will talk about the 17 strategic objectives that are in that little colored graphic in just a little bit. We then, one of the strategic objectives, as Vice President Darren has mentioned, was the Governance Review Task Force and the Terms of Reference Task Force. And I briefed council on what I saw as the goals of both those organizations and the powers of both those organizations. And we developed extensive terms of reference for them. And on in end of October, we actually formed those task force with one of them containing only members of council, but the governance review task force having councillors and members at large on that committee. So that sort of took us to the end of 2020. And let's talk about those strategic objectives, those 17 things that I'd like to do to give you an overview. So you can see they're broken down into the four thrust lines: the organizational excellence, regulatory excellence, for both registration and licensing, and for professional practice, and lastly, stakeholder relations. So I had 17 initiatives that I wanted to do, and each of these were aimed at strengthening what existed in the organization, either capturing processes that we currently exist and formalizing them through documentation, or developing new processes for areas we need to expand. So information technology modernization still continues, and it will be a big thrust line. Moving to the Microsoft Office suite, if you're a volunteer, you understand we've moved completely to Teams, or will finish the transition to Teams shortly. But there's other things we have to do. We have to improve our database. I want more automated engagement on terms of registration and things like that. The governance review is ongoing. We need to bring 64 policies in, everything from respect in the workplace to appropriate use of IT equipment to a volunteer code of conduct. There's a number of things I'm talking to the Governance Review Task Force about that we need to put in place. We need an enterprise risk model in order to capture what we see as potential risks to the profession and the association. And we need to come up with a mitigation strategy for all those. We need to talk about organizational resilience. Unfortunately, with a staff of 13, in some areas we're only one person deep, and there's a lot of corporate knowledge in those people. And so if someone wins the lottery and decides that they're finished working for Engineers Nova Scotia, we have some large holes to fill, which is partly why I'm working on process and in some cases trying to get more depth in the staff. When it comes to regulatory excellence, registration and licensing, Fair Registrations Practice Act is a big, I won't say limitation, it's a constraint that we must work inside in order to make sure that we are treating everyone equitably and fairly. Part of this is looking at competency-based assessment as a mechanism to fulfill the requirements of fair registration for all applicants. And we're also looking at issues of life membership based on national issues that surround life membership and continued practice. When it comes to regulatory excellence on professional practice, really beefing up Chris Dove's shop and the professional practice side of the house to make sure I can do those three things, to make sure we can do those three things that I mentioned along the spectrum, to strengthen our production of standards and guidelines, to ensure we provide more education to our members on what their regulatory obligations are. Excuse me. And lastly, in the stakeholder relationship side of the house, we play and engage with a lot of people provincially and nationally. Some of those relationships produce more fruit than others. Not that any are less important, because they're all important. But we need to prioritize our engagement based on the resources we have. And we have to decide who we're going to engage with first in order to strengthen our position and strengthen our regulatory capability. I also want to look at a volunteer management program, not only to recruit and attract volunteers, but also to work on volunteer development. Ideally, I see people coming in to our CEO advisory committees, working their way through the committees, gaining expertise in regulation and self-regulation, eventually ending up on committees of council, and then lastly, making a run for council itself. And I think there's a valuable volunteer career that can be had for individuals to learn more about self-regulation and contribute to self-regulation. So that's an overview of the 17 things that I'd like to do. What is it I was hoping to achieve with those 17 things? Let's go through them. So the first thing was I wanted to validate the structure of Engineers Nova Scotia to make sure that we had the capacity and the capability to effectively regulate the profession. I wanted to update all our policies in order to ensure that we have the right guidance to the people who support self-regulation, as well as really shoring up our internal processes and procedures. I wanted to I wanted to transform to a culture of openness and accountability, firstly by delegating responsibilities to the appropriate agency, but also through making sure that our policies are shared in an open forum. I don't see very few policies that can't be shared with the membership to understand what we're about. I saw instilling member pride or strengthening member pride. We're an association that values learning and growth, and we want to be inclusive. We want to be representative of the demographics of Nova Scotia, and we want to bring all those groups we can to understand that engineering is a profession that's open to them as well. I wanted to develop organizational resilience, as I've mentioned before, a business continuity model, plus making sure that we could sustain any short-term hits in terms of people or capacities. And, oops, sorry, I'll just go back there. I've gone too far. And the last one is effective engagement, and that speaks to the shareholder, stakeholder piece. In a sense, I want to make sure that we are connected to the right organizations that we can help and that can help us. So where does that take us for the next little while? So basically, we're going to look at a new strategic plan. So those 17 objectives were based on a year ago, and they're still extant today, but we're going to undertake a strategic planning session to develop a 5-year strategic plan. And some of those objectives may amend, may translate, or may drop off the table based on what we see as the 5-year plan after a comprehensive, holistic review. And what we're planning to do with a strategic consultant is to review our existing mission, vision, and fundamental strategic objectives to make sure they're still extant or whether they need to be changed. We want to develop a 5-year corporate strategic plan that's public facing, so everyone can see what it is we're trying to do and can hold us accountable for staying on that path. We need to do a SWOT analysis to figure out part of our risk model and figure out what our opportunities are right now and what we should be looking to mitigate against. And really what we want to do is ensure that we've prioritized the goals and established KPIs and measurable objectives that you as the membership can hold the council and me accountable for achieving. So what's the process that we're looking to do that with? We've now developed a policy development framework that the Governance Review Task Force is looking to implement. We've done our first governance review task force meeting on the 5th of March, so we're on our way to tackling those 64 policies that we need. We in July, so we're looking right now. I'm engaging a strategic consultant. The RFP went out, and we're just in the tail end of selecting one of the consultant who's going to lead council through the strategic planning session. And the aim will be to have a draft strategic plan completed by the end of the summer if all goes well. And after that time, we will then engage in a members consultation period. I'm just going to build this. Sorry, my builds were a little out of whack there. So let me put the whole slide in as opposed to trying to look very sophisticated on this one. So the aim then is to do the strategic planning in the spring timeframe from hopefully beginning of April to June. And then we'll have the draft strategic plan out to members to critique and review. We'll probably put it on our website for people to have a look at. And then we want to engage in member consultations in late summer, early fall to receive your feedback and your comments on the strategic plan. And we'll take that feedback and those comments into consideration as we draft the final strategic plan, which I'm hoping will be put out sometime in the October-November timeframe. Now, timelines change. This is a plan on paper, and as we used to say in the military, the only reason you write a plan on paper is so that you have somewhere to write the changes. So if this does change, of course, we will let you know as the membership, but there are so many unforeseens that come into play, and attentions get shifted if something calamitous or a change in the environment happens. But this is the plan that we're looking to deliver on. So the last thing I want to talk to you about is our stakeholders, to give you an idea of the space that I believe we're playing in. So this is a draft that I've presented to council, and we will confirm this during the strategic planning session. But on this document, we pretty much have 4 groups of people. In the white shapes, you'll see Engineers Nova Scotia through the volunteer network and the staff network that works to the purpose of regulating the profession in Nova Scotia. The other groups you'll see 3 different groups as I've labeled it. You'll see allies, you'll see partners, and you'll see stakeholders. And the way we're differentiating our engagement with all those is that a partner is an organization that has the same mission that we do. And that's writ large, that's to protect the public. So any of our sibling regulators, whether they're national or provincial, I have much to learn from the Barrister Society. I have much to learn from the College of Physicians and Surgeons through process and policy, because they worry about many of the same things that we do in terms of professional conduct and skilled practice, though the practices change. I'm also interested nationally for other engineering regulators on how we work. And then there's stakeholders, the ones in purple. And stakeholders are those organizations that are affected by policy decisions that we make. So if we make a policy decision related to membership, who is eligible, what the requirements are, that's going to affect members and members companies. So the members and members are stakeholders in that whole situation. There's other organizations out there such as ISANs and other governmental agencies that are stakeholders. So we're looking to round out that list to figure out who we should engage with. So that's a down and dirty on what we're focused on right now at the council level and at the staff level here. There's obviously areas that I haven't touched on, which I'm happy to take in the Q&A as we go forward. I'm also interested in your thoughts. If you have something that you'd like to share with us, there's many forums to do this. This is just one of them. One of the pitches I would like to make now is that the nomination committee, a subset of council, has just been struck to look at potential nominees for our council elections that will happen this summer. So if you are interested or know someone who you believe would be a good counselor, we're looking for nominations to go and put on the ballot. Obviously, there's a slight vetting process to make sure people have the requisite experience, a background to do that. But in the end, you as the members decide who you want to have on council. We're just trying to put the best nominees forward to help us move along the path that we're looking to move along. So I'll pass it back to VP Darren if there's any closing thoughts before we take questions.
Well, thanks, Pal. It was a fantastic overview of what's going on at the association, and thank you very much for that. I see we have more of a comment than a question, I guess, and that it's from Denise, and that's suggesting that the town hall is a great start, and many of us are working through some virtual meetings and remote approaches. It's been a year of uncertainty, which it definitely has. She's suggesting that the timelines are very ambitious. Maybe so, but Pal's a very ambitious guy.
It's a, so Denise, it's a great point.
I think we lost you, Pal.
We did lose Pal.
Did they lose me? Okay. I guess while we wait for Pal to come back, here he is.
Council. Yeah, I lost my internet for a bit. Sorry about that. I was just going to say to Denise, yeah, so council has raised that, and I came in very hard. I also believe where there's no pressure, there's no flow. so I am fairly hard on myself. Whether these are ambitious, I said the timelines may change. There are a number of variables that are on the outside. It's the delivery of what we're hoping our strategic consultant can provide. And as we go through this, as we look at what the complexity of the final product is, it's only fair to the membership to provide adequate time for consultations. So I'm cognizant of the ability or the requirement to make sure that we have a good product and that we also have an ability to consult in a meaningful basis with the membership. So as I said, plans change. If we're going to be delayed, I'd rather be delayed and come up with a good product than try to rush and meet these timelines and come up with an inferior product. So fully noted. Thank you.
So we do have a question from Wayne McCulloch. He says, what does your crystal ball tell you about holding an in-person AGM this year?
Well, I don't know if I look like Dr. Strang or not, but I'm not Dr. Strang. So it's an interesting question. Right now, the planning guidance that we're giving to the staff and what we've talked about at the council level is that we were going to suspend any face-to-face meetings until September. And that was based on a couple of things. Even if the situation improved over the summer, we were hoping a majority of us would have vaccinations sometime by July, August, and that time frame. So we're planning for a hybrid AGM. That means a very small live component. We typically, I don't know, I've not having had one, I don't know how many people actually show up in person, but we're trying to limit the number of people in the room to conform to existing health protocols. So we were thinking, depending on the size of the room, maybe 30, 40 people inside the room, including award winners that would be presented. And then we would simulcast the AGM as well. So it wouldn't be as sterile and as dull as the last AGM where all you heard was voices and saw pictures. It would actually be a little more dynamic. This tool that we're using right now, Adobe Connect, is one of the contenders for what we would use to conduct the AGM. So I would say I don't have a crystal ball, but I would say unless something goes drastically wrong with COVID, we will have a live component to our AGM this year. Now, I don't know about the PD session. I have a meeting with the staff on Monday where we're going to start the brainstorming and concept work on what AGM will look like.
Pal, there were a few questions earlier from Christopher Davis, but they actually disappeared as quickly as they appeared from the Q&A pod. So Chris, if you're still out there and you want to resubmit, please do so.
Yeah, we can wait. I know that I also don't want to keep all of you from busy things. We've been at this for 50 minutes now, and you know, if the questions don't come in this venue or you don't want to send them here, there's lots of opportunities in sending questions to us either at info@engineersnovascotia.ca, and I'll get routed to the person. I don't mind the occasional question in there, but if you send it to me directly, it sort of sits in my queue waiting to get answered. If the staff come see me, they talk to me, and you'll get an answer much quicker because we talk about what the issue was.
So I have a few more additions. Yvonne Lafort says COVID-19 was a great exercise in that it has become easier for rural and remote members to actually participate in more Engineers Nova Scotia activities and events. It would be good if future activities had a balance of some virtual events and some in-person events all over the province.
Right, and I just read Chris's comments as well, which were on the same line.
Okay.
So I don't see us ever moving away from a virtual presence. We've looked at this now from a number of angles, and to answer your question, we've had more engagement and more interest from the membership for a number of reasons. Even when we used to hold live lunch and learns, attendance was limited, and some people could not break away even in the HRM for the hour to come to the session. And it was definitely impossible for people outside the HRM to do that. But by broadcasting them or putting them on a platform such as this, we've had more engagement. Now I don't have metrics to tell you. I know that registration for the events has gone up, and we're getting many more people outside HRM who are able to attend. So just as we've sort of realized that there's a new reality post-COVID for many of you who are working from home, you know, will you ever see the working back at the office 5 days a week, you know, for 8 hours a day, or we now move to a new reality where we're going to timeshare at the office and things like that. We're looking at the same sort of issues for our professional development and all our activities we do. At the very least, I'm looking at a way to broadcast live activities so that those that wish to see it on the net can do so. So we've seen Facebook streaming, we've seen live streaming through other venues as well. I just think that's going to be a part of life now.
If I could just jump in there, pal, Yvonne is in Cape Breton as I am, and that's been an observation before in that in the last town hall meeting, in that I think it's important not to overlook the membership and engineers who are in the zones outside of Halifax Metro. And I know in Cape Breton we've had pre-COVID like lunch and learn sessions here in Sydney, and they were always very well attended. I think the last one we had pre-COVID, there were something like almost 50 people in the room, and I think that the total zone membership is like 110. So that was a huge turnout. But that's been a complaint, I think, from some people in Cape Breton zone, in that they, you know, there's a hunger for that. They enjoy that sort of session. It gets them out and you know, to find out what's going on. But there's not enough of that. And it seems like most of the activity is taking place in Halifax Metro. And in all fairness, I mean, that's where the vast majority of the membership is living and working. So, but I do kind of identify with Yvonne's comment in that I think there's more work to be done in terms of involving the membership outside of Halifax Metro. So thanks for that comment, Yvonne.
The question is from Harry Damon. He says, will stakeholder sessions possibly go into zones if COVID restraints are lifted?
I've talked to Darren and I have talked, Darren has been heavily involved in the zone aspect up there in Cape Breton. I've talked to others. I really need to get out and visit zone reps and understand how the zone structure that can support us. It's a little, there's been a shift in my thoughts on this one as well, because traditionally now, or not traditionally zones, some zones have had very strong roles and some zones have not been as active as well. And I'm trying to reconcile the zone model with our emergence of technology as a venue to do things. I always think there's going to be a role for the zones, and I'm interested in talking to the zone reps and understanding how we can reinvigorate that model and maybe exploit technology to also help that model as well. So that's sort of my thoughts.
I think that
Darren,
would be a good idea.
I'm
I'm the zone rep for Cape Breton Victoria Zone, and
getting their
one of
feedback of zone reps and
not
members
a complaint,
in
but
each
an
zones to help us
observation that's
move
been made to me in the past is that most of the activity, for outreach and for these, lunch and learns and just basically activity by Engineers Nova Scotia tends to happen in the Halifax metro area, and in all fairness, that's where the vast majority of the membership is. But with the advent of these technology platforms, which have probably been around for many years now, but we haven't really made a lot of use of them. People in the zones outside of Halifax Metro can participate, and they can attend events remotely. So I think we're starting to address that issue, but I think more needs to be done. And as you say, Al, I mean some zones are probably more active than others, but there is a lot of good work being done in the zones, and I think we really do need to look at the zone structure and how we can either support or change that to kind of bring everybody together. So
thanks, Darren. I'm just going to add a sort of innovative thought out there. So the zones, or some places some provinces they're called branches, and in some provinces they're called chapters. Almost all the larger geographical large space regulators have this structure of trying to get membership in different geographical areas engaged in either association business or understanding the regulatory side of the house. Ontario has just had a very novel sort of request. So we've traditionally chapters or zones, or zones obviously based on geography, but chapters and branches have been based on geography. Well, there's been a request from a group in Ontario saying we would like to start a chapter or branch, if you want to call it that it relates to all graduates from the Middle East engineering, because we all understand each other. We have the same problems, whether it's communications, whether it's cultural, and so they become a support base from each other. So this whole idea of it being based on demographics as opposed to being on geography is a novel idea. It comes with pitfalls, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's the solution, but this is the kind of thinking that has been generated by one cohort of membership in another regulator. So it really makes us think is, how do we design, providing the services that a zone provides, do we need to think about it in geography, or are there other ways we can do it? Because we are now connected so virtually as well. So being in the same location is not as limiting a factor as it has been before. So there's nothing, I'm not saying that that's the way I'm going or anything like that. I'm just letting you know that there is some thinking out there on deciding how best
No,
to
that's it.
mobilize the membership to serve the interests of the membership.